Good morning, everyone. My name is Rich Rogers. I'm a member of the camp's board, as well as a founder of Xemelgo, a local Industry 4.0 startup doing software. In today's session, I'm pretty excited. It's going to be robotics and automation. And we have both Joshua Hockett as well as Marco Micheletti. And just to give you guys a quick sort of overview of their background. So Joshua specializes in science-intensive product development as well as test automation. Over the last 18 years, he's been involved in designing and testing of a wide variety of products, including smartwatches, cell phones, laptops, lab instruments, IoT sensors, and medical devices. Joshua's adventures in product development, test automation, and manufacturing have taken him to factories around the world to support both startups and multinational organizations. Marco has led teams shipping iconic innovations at companies such as Valve and Microsoft. Marco has driven automation, product development, supply chain, and manufacturing for products, including the Xbox 360, Nike GPS watch, and Fuel Band, Stream Controller, as well as Stream VR Kit. Marco brings deep expertise and leadership in high-value automation, advanced manufacturing, and autonomous vehicle solutions. And Marco holds a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Washington. And so with that, Joshua and Marco.
Thanks for the introduction, Rich and Kurt, and we're really happy to be here at the CAMPS conference. We look forward to this every year, so thanks for putting together a great virtual event for us, and we're excited to talk today. I think I'm going to start off really quick with, just quick agenda. We're going to intros. Thank you guys for that, and we want to hit on, get into why are we automating? What are we talking about automation in terms of automating manufacturing and robotics processes? We want to talk a little bit about some of the myths and facts and misconceptions around it today. And then what we really want to get to is kind of changing perceptions of those misconceptions and coming up with an appropriate mindset and approach for approaching the opportunities around using automation and manufacturing in your organizations. And so, we're going to start today. It's a little bit more of a high level and strategic discussion versus getting into some of the deep technical aspects of it. But ultimately, what we want to do is talk about and share how we think about automation and driving business value into your organizations through the use of tools like automation and robotics. Just a little bit of background on Fresh. I'll let Josh talk a little bit here.
Yeah. So Marco and I represent the hardware team at Fresh. Fresh has been around since 2007. We have over 350 employees at 4 offices and offices around the world. Fresh Consulting is a design-led company. So today it's going to be a little bit of us kind of talking from a holistic approach, the ask the why questions. We will happily talk about details of robots all day long, but the why are we doing it, what's our goal, is the place we always like to start. If you go to the next slide, Fresh has a very broad offering. Today you're talking to the hardware team, but we offer everything from product strategy to mobile robots cruising around. The hardware team at Fresh is kind of fundamentally based on automated manufacturing automation and automated test and mobile robotics. Those are kind of the core areas that we played. Me and Marco both come from a product development background, but we got a team of folks to help in those areas.
So, today where we want to start a little bit, like Josh just said, is we want to talk about the why and understanding at a high level some of the business objectives, but also looking out into the world at these macro forces that essentially are factors that we deal with every day as manufacturing and hardware and engineering organizations. And so this is a starting place where I like to talk about and use as a jumping off point at a really high level and to talk about these macro forces in manufacturing. I would say, very typically throughout my career in supply chain and manufacturing operations, a a lot of time we're really focusing on what's the unit price, what's the cost, what are the lead times and quality and our inventory levels. These are the things that I think that we often spend the 80% of our time in, and usually they're the right things that matter 80% of the time. But when we talk about, you know, the costs of manufacturing, the cost of our products, we know that there's you know, the total cost of ownership. This is kind of like a TCO stack or a TCO wheel here, and we really need to consider all these other inputs and forces that shape our environment and shape the world literally every day when we're looking at making big decisions, and what are the factors that influence our businesses. So I would say, you know, normally we're looking at the top half of this. And it used to be kind of, you know, business is normal, and maybe the worst thing that happened is, you know, every once in a while we have to jump on a plane and head to China and go spend some time at the factory and deal with an issue. But otherwise, our manufacturing partners, we can keep them at, you know, arm's length away, or we have these really distributed global supply chain networks, and that seemed to be, you know, kind am the status quo for, you know, let's say last 20-30 years in this expansion of the global manufacturing environment. But, you know, in recent times, and it's maybe not recent, it's always been there, but it seems to me that, you know, we need to pay a little more attention to the bottom half of this chart. And I've seen shifts for a number of reasons. Again, these, you know, consider these as macro forces. Organizations I've seen have started to value different things in understanding their total cost of ownership. Some organizations I've worked with in the past, you know, sending people over to Asia to drop in for 2 or 3 weeks on a manufacturing line just wasn't part of their culture or something that they valued. Sometimes a lot of the companies, especially in this area, are developing some extremely leading edge products, and they're really important for them to keep tight control of their intellectual property. So some of these factors we want to kind of jump into a little bit is exploring some of these things that have come up. And I would say in the last 5 or 10 years, it might be me and my perception, but it seems that they're happening more and more often. So wanted to spend just a little time talking about some of these others in this category. Natural disasters. You know, there's a lot of things that have happened that have interrupted our supply chains. When you think about the Texas freeze last year, you know, hurricanes and global warming it seems to me that there are events that are happening at larger scale and more often. And sometimes there's freak events. I remember, you know, floods in Thailand, entire factories and fabs getting shut down, and I was going to launch a product and we couldn't get, you know, particular components, just when entire supply chains certain lines of products get completely disrupted. So again, these supply and other types of supply chain disruptions, you know, you just don't know sometimes when a ship decides to block the Suez Canal for a month or two, and half the world trade is completely disrupted. These are all things that we've experienced, you know, longshoremen strikes, you know, Apple trying to launch, you know, popularity of iPhones, and all of the global supply of MLCCs getting sucked up, and you know, you're trying to launch your little product next to them, and some of these things are just you never know what's going on out there. So some of these other items, you know, global and pandemics, and you know what, you know, COVID, SARS, MERS, there's all these things now that have changed how we are doing business globally. You know, tariff wars. You know, the government's deciding that, hey, we're going to go to war with not just China, but charge ridiculous tariffs on all of our partners, and you know, take 6 to 12 and 18 months out of our lives trying to make things really difficult for us to get materials until things really, you know, can get settled. Labor shortages, you know, IP wars and cyber wars. These are all things that as we look at this, that we need to be taking into consideration And why I start with this, you know, this macro and global kind of view is that we have to put strategies in place to think about and deal and mitigate all these risks. And one of the ways we'd like to think about this at Fresh is we like to exert a lot of control over when there's a lot of uncertainty. How much of the supply chain or how much of our partners or how close can we put things together so that we can exert a high degree of control when there's high levels of uncertainty. And that's our general approach at times for risk mitigation. And as we want our manufacturing automation or our manufacturing operations to be closer to us and our supply chains to be shorter when there's more global uncertainty, this starts to elevate the importance of automation and creating flexible and you know, high value or risk mitigated approaches to our manufacturing operations. So this is just really intended to be a little bit of background on how we set the table and thinking about manufacturing operations and driving the needs for potential automation in our applications. So when we want to go and we've decided, hey, automation is the right thing for us, I find us battling one aspect I see often battling is some of the myths and misconceptions out there, which are common statements that we see. And what I think is they do us a little bit of a disservice when we are trying to approach automation, and really we're narrowing in and focusing a little bit on the wrong thing. And so I want to talk about those fairly quickly, so that instead of when we think about a particular aspect, we should consider how we should really approach those misconceptions when we're talking to our partners, when we're talking to our management, when we're talking to our organizations around how we want to look at our particular situation and address automation. So we'll go through a few of these. So we have 7 of these myths and misconceptions, and again, try to go through these kind of quickly. But some of the things you see is automation is too expensive, especially for small and mid-sized companies. And it's true, automation requires investment in capital, but really what we need to do is not take that as a global statement. What we really want to do is understand, yes, we are going to make an investment, but let's make an appropriate size investment, and let's start small and focus on what we can do for eliminating obvious pain points, and learn how to approach automation in an appropriate way for building a tool for us to use that demonstrates strong ROI, but also adds value into your organization by building this new mindset on how to approach automating robotics and automated manufacturing operations. And there's a few things to consider when you look at the cost and expense of this. Is part of this is, consider what happens over time if you're not investing in your future, as well as look at opportunities out there. There's a lot of people spending and innovating in a lot of different business models that can help lower the cost as well. Another misconception is automation is just we're gonna set it up and it's gonna run itself, and we don't need people. And so one of the questions that you really need to ask yourself is who's up for the challenge? The automation is an opportunity. First of all, it definitely takes people to run equipment of any kind. So and we're going to talk about this a couple more times here, but you need operators, you need oversight, you need intervention when things go down. A robot can't repair itself. Automated stations are going to do one thing really well, but until they find that exception, they're going to stop. And so what we're talking about is, there's a skill, a need for skilled people that are always going to be needed to make sure that any piece of equipment that we're running is running at optimum efficiency and able to be producing at a high rate. And so when we look at what's going to happen in our workforce, the operators are going to get this great opportunity to say, who wants to embrace automation, because it'll surprise you that the people that are doing sometimes performing the dull, dirty, dangerous, the highly repetitive work, have great insight on how this process can be improved, and bringing them along on the ride will really pay off dividends in allowing them to have to be a key stakeholder in your implementations.
Yeah, investment in automation equals an investment in people.
That's true. Yeah, and talking a little bit about in people, a myth and misconception: automation will take jobs away. And again, we need these people around to maintain. We need maintenance people. We need repair. We need folks that are going to be there tending and handling materials, or just making sure that the processes are running. And sometimes you get your folks and they look at it and we can do this a little better. And so now we're taking a person that was doing let's say a semi-technical operation and taking them and potentially using their skills to improve the equipment, and we're turning them into technicians and engineers and increasing their value that they're contributing. As well as, sometimes you are creating high output opportunities, but what you're now doing, instead of getting rid of people, you're able to retask them into positions where they can do more valuable work. Because as much as I see in this work environment, we're not laying off people. We're struggling to get every single great person we can, and as well as to bring them in and keep them engaged in what they're doing. And part of what we're again talking about at a high level is keeping folks engaged in the manufacturing space, because it leads to great opportunities in the economy, as well as creating a robust ecosystem around manufacturing. And here's a fact that we'd like to sprinkle in a few facts and figures here. But and by the way, this is a fact I got from, I want to shout out to Hans Handersball from Momenta, as well as the source of this information from a Bank of America analyst. But for every job we keep, or even every job we create, every job we keep in manufacturing, 7.4 jobs are created around it and supporting that. And I think that's really a powerful figure there. Again, another of these misconceptions: automation is just about pinching pennies and cost reduction. And you may see cost reductions, but that's not really where you should be starting your approach to automation. We should be looking at, and we're definitely going to talk about this in the end, is focusing on what are your outcomes and objectives for your business, and establishing good metrics for measuring them before we look at and set a target of, we need a cost reduction of X% or X dollars and cents. There's a lot of value to look at around your operation that automation and robotics can bring. And so, we're kind of asking, what are the value? How do we quantify improved safety or capacity, or what's this, when we properly implement, what are some of these values, and how are we going to measure these in the future? And we see, and we'll talk about this again a little bit more at the end, but the benefits are huge to your organization. And so, to move quickly, automation won't work for us. We're locked in. We got to do things this way. We're qualified. And I say, don't look at trying to wholesale replace everything. Start small. Look at automating in the right spot. When you look at taking too big of an approach at automation, you do create inflexibility. And what we're really trying to do is pick the right place where automation doesn't create lock-ins, but actually enables flexibility in your organization. There's stories you've heard about Elon Musk at Tesla, when they went into high automation of the Tesla vehicle line, they said we're living in automation hell, because they took on too much of it at once, and it took them a long time and a huge effort to get through it. It was very similar with other projects I've done before, and I think really what we want to do is take a measured approach to make sure we're being flexible and not creating that lock-in. Automation is going to solve all of our problems, and again, that's too much of a burden to be putting on an automated process. But there are important things to consider when you automate a process, because automating a particular you may solve a very localized specific problem, but one of the tendencies in automation is that it exposes your next constraint or your next issue, and this can help you in a continuous improvement mindset type of space, but you have to be aware of this as you're going into this. You may find adjacent weaknesses in your process or consistencies in your supply chain. Automation does one thing usually really well, and any variation around it from a component, the environment, tends to expose where you might have limitations in your process, and you just really need to be aware of these things. Great example is we had a screw supplier, a 1 cent screw, and we noticed that our process variation, a significant variation in our process, and screws weren't going into the product appropriately anymore. And we launched a huge investigation, and what we found out is the supplier had brought on a second tool, and a variation in a 1 cent part was really causing a lot of havoc along our production lines. And so this wouldn't have been, in a non-automated situation, it wouldn't have been exposed, but probably ever, but automation exposed it. And once we knew about it, we were able to put the right controls in place and continue, in a high throughput environment. And just last misconception is, robots are better than humans. And so, it's a yes and a no. And we talk about the 3Ds. When it's dull, dirty, dangerous, use a robot, automate. When there's a high degree of speed required, high repetition, you don't want people doing that. Yes, robot is a better choice for that. When you're properly set up, qualified, and proven, yes, do that. When it's easier to scale and replicate, yes, you use automation and equipment to your advantage. But let's understand where it's not, in unpredictable and unconstrained environments, robotics tends to struggle or requires a large degree of investment to overcome some of these challenges, where human interaction and management is needed. People, and stakeholder engagement, where there's high ambiguity and when nuance and context. So we're not talking about automating everything. It's really about automating the right things, and this figure kind of, Lisa, in a McKinsey study, you look at, hey, there's a huge potential for automating a lot of activities across manufacturing and food service and some hospitality and retail aspects, mining, and they're saying, look, we can automate 80% of it, but it's not saying we're going to automate 80% of these industries. We're going to automate. There's a potential for a high degree of automation in the right aspects of this, and so again, it's really about the right approach here. And so I think now's a good time. We could take maybe a minute or two, Rich, if there's any questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there are two great questions. I think they, one ties into sort of the myths part of the session that we just sort of covered. And there's another one that ties into sort of this percentage number that you're showing there, 78%, which is actually pretty remarkable. So in terms of myths, I actually think this question aligns with some of the myths, right? And so the question is, are you starting to see more overlap of blockchain technology and automation, or do you see this more of like a 2 to 5 years integration from now?
I'm sorry, watching?
Blockchain.
Blockchain.
Yeah, I haven't really seen much need from customers for blockchain, except when we're talking about provisioning and authentication of products. Less so in the US. I anticipate seeing more of it when people are worried about IP over in Asia, but we haven't engaged with it much.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place that it's fresh as a whole as an organization. We look at where these applications are going, where blockchain applications are going to be important. Not yet in what we're doing, but I think if we look around the corner, like Josh is saying, there are some applications where we might start seeing that as a tool for some portion.
Absolutely. And then Jake had a great question. Can you provide some examples of robotics and automation in a non-widget environment? So that would be lower volume, highly customized business model, and where that might make sense to deploy.
Yeah, it was a great question. I think the renaissance in CNC is an example of being able to do highly customized things with low cost tooling, flexible setups, and using things like robot arms, where if you're making 10 of something and you're making 20 versions of it, flexible automation with the reduced cost in robots have made things like that much more possible.
Yeah, I was going to say that something going to the same spot. First, let's look at automating the right place of that value chain or that operation. But low cost arms like material tending, coming off a press, like maybe you are doing a manual CNC or have a number of different setups and operations that are running through the CNC where the variation is, but training that robot to either load or tend or unload is an operation there. And so, I think the key is there, not trying to be too ambitious with automating where there's high variability. Let's look at the place where you can control a certain aspect of this and talk about how you can automate that.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about it in a minute, but are you looking at automating to reduce labor or increase quality of individual things? We've definitely done plenty of automation projects where the goal was not actually to reduce labor, but to create a higher quality product. So
sure. Is that good for anything else, Rich, or should we continue on?
Yep, I think we can press on. Thanks,
great.
Scott.
That was a great pause point there. So transitioning, we want to talk about how should we approach automation. Basically, kind of myths and misconceptions are I think we're trying to challenge mindsets that or the misconceptions that are out there. And what we really want to come out of here today is how should we think about this so that we can set up projects that are successful and are able to demonstrate and quantify the value to an organization. And that's, I think, really where we want to get to today. And so what we want to do is look at, from the top down, let's start with your leadership in your business organization and talk about what are the key objectives that you're trying to achieve. Let's not start from the bottom up of we have to reduce the number of people, we have to achieve some type of cost saving. Let's look at a larger level business objective and work our way down that approach. And so, here's some examples of questions that fall into the objective around performance. We want to a good question or a good statement to start off with would be, our objective is to improve throughput. We want to increase our utilization of equipment space of whatever. We want to create additional efficiencies in this space. We want to be a flexible manufacturer. Let's start with these types of objectives. Maybe you have quality objectives, right? So our approach to how we do these are going to be different. Let's reduce waste and rejects. Let's increase consistency and quality. Let's try to address an issue we might be having with customer return rates, or we don't have visibility in our data collection and traceability. So what can we need to deal with that. And some other, we want to bring people into this as well, because it does impact people, and we want to always be considering maybe there's an issue around safety or perceived, potential issue around safety that we want to increase engagement. We want to keep our people from leaving and giving them great opportunities to increase their skills and continue to invest and keep them, because because they're really our best resource that we have. So again, these are just potential, and we'll use these as essentially our case as we work through here. So what are the objectives? We're going to talk about, we just talked about some of the objectives, and then how do we transition these into actual metrics that we can evaluate for in a return on investment for our automation project. So we just kind of laid out, here's potential set of business objectives, and feel free to take or modify and work off these, or think about any of these. But for any type of objective, what we really want to do is turn these into objective KPIs and metrics that we can actually measure. So, for example, the objective being we want to increase performance, increase throughput, utilization, etc. We're going to establish a metric and a key performance indicator for cycle time, or how many parts per day we gear, or what's our utilization and uptime efficiencies, or time between changeovers and setups. So these are, again, our examples of some performance metrics, some quality metrics that you might have for a particular process. And again, establishing the right type of objective measurement for, personnel related or other, we need to turn this into something that we can count.
Yep. So I'd say, or one thing we like to do is think about this from that top-down approach. If we go bottom up and we say, how can I make more widgets per hour? We often underestimate the return on investment for automation, and we miss opportunities to improve the business in other places. So as we go down this list of key performance metrics, if we look at, we want to increase the number of widgets, you may look at the time between changeovers and setups. It may actually be a detriment to wanting to automate, or it may be positive, it may change your approach. And then there's things that come for free as you start to automate, and we think about quality. As a robot grabs a part, that's an opportunity to test, inspect, and look that may not add any significant cost to your automation solution, but may greatly improve the output of your line. So thinking from those high level things of what are the key business needs I'm trying to meet with this automation solution, will identify opportunities as you're investing in the automation solution here.
Yeah, and what we often see is, like Josh says, we see an increase in efficiency and value creation, essentially, to the, we don't want to miss what's the value to the organization. By establishing good goals and objectives, it gives you a wider perspective than just looking at what are my labor costs. For example, if we maybe I'll just jump ahead here. When we do a high, when we follow this methodology and this approach, we'll set up essentially a model that becomes a template for what we're trying to achieve in terms of metrics, what we feel is believable, achievable. And when we start looking at not just the throughput or not just the part cost, we see that looking at this wider perspective, we see a 3 to 5x increase in the total value delivered and productivity delivered over just the labor impact. By increasing your throughputs, you're making your factory space, and however you measure it, if it's per square foot of operation, not just per people, the benefit across your whole business is much more than just the person cost or the labor component. We've now created a highly efficient, doing this properly, we've created a template for being highly efficient, and as well as capturing all of the value to look at, and we just see we approach it with, this is what we want to do, but really the impact is much wider across the whole organization. And this metric here is what I've seen over the last couple of years in terms of, we go in, we create a model, we are looking at trying to figure out, does a particular investment pay off? And it often surprises that the investment is, the value that it creates is much greater by a higher factor than what we even thought it would be able to achieve. And so again, we have to take into this holistic approach of, it's not just the material costs, it's not just the labor components, it's the whole efficiency across your business. And that's, again, this McKinsey quote from this quote kind of, it stuck to me when I saw this, and it just said the majority of benefits may come not from just the labor reduction, but all of these other benefits that come through your organization, that sometimes are hard to measure. But what we're actually advocating is, we can go back and measure and quantify this, because it's really a ripple through effect. Yeah, and so well, there's something back there I wanted to touch on, but it's just really, we need to take this disciplined approach and be able to think about how we want to approach automating the robotic applications in the right way.
Yep, I think when we look at that list of potential opportunities, we like to ask the what if questions. What if my yield dropped by 3%? What is that worth to me? What if I was able to test this and reduce all of those customer returns? Being realistic, but asking those what if questions. What if I could drop my turnover rate with my employees by half in this area because they're no longer hating that repetitive task? You identify quite a bit more value than just the how many heads at how many dollars per hour am I eliminating by putting this robot in?
That's right. And so ultimately what we want to get to is and what we would love to do kind of in conclusion here is we'd love to talk a little bit more with you, or if anybody's interested in talking, like, hey, I have, like someone earlier had that great question. We have a high mix situation, but how do we really think about, using automation in our approach in the future for our situation? Here's a couple opportunities and exactly the type of thing that we love to talk about. Visit our booth during the day. We'll be there for a little bit. But the other best thing is we're going to have a virtual meetup next Friday, and you can RSVP for that. And some folks have already done that. And we'll talk more specifically to you about your application, where the opportunities are, and how can we help you maybe even set up your ROI analysis so that you're thinking about it the right way. And that's something that we'd love to be doing with all the members camps and anybody in this area as we look at opportunities for again, going back, I think there's a great force and potential in everything that's going on lately in the last few years. There's a huge force accelerating us to really take hard looks at how do we do things and exert control and mitigate risks in our operations. And so this is, automation's a fantastic tool, and it's robotics and are becoming so much more accessible these days. And so there's a lot more opportunities to do smaller and less capital intensive looks at specific applications, and it's changing every day. So I think with that, if there's any other questions, we thank you for your time. We thank folks for hanging out, and happy to take a few more questions here.
Excellent. I think we do have a few more minutes. So I have one question that I'll sort of throw out there. I tend to think of like IoT as automating the data collection. I think of AI sort of like automating some of the decision making. And obviously, the robotics is automating a lot of like the manual tasks, the repetitive tasks that are out there. And each one of those, they're sort of evolving almost like in their own silo. But are you sort of seeing anyone that's like pulling them all together, or are they sort of still separate journeys at this point?
There's one I'm thinking of with the data collection. I'm sorry, what you said, the AI plus
Yeah, the IoT is sort of automating like the data collection.
Yeah.
The AI is automating the decision making, and then the robotics is automating the repetitive tasks, right?
I see the IoT and the data collection in the AI in those spaces starting to merge, where you can, like, for example, use vision systems and train, then use an AI to train for a particular issue. And then you see this actually in a lot of places in the last year, like even if it's medical technicians scanning x-rays, they can't make diagnosis, but they can point out things that they're trained to look for.
Right.
And you start to see that type of, I've seen those applications in manufacturing. I'm not quite in a space where we see, I think robots making a lot of decisions like freeform on what they're going to do next in a manufacturing environment.
Right.
And I think, there's probably days where that's coming.
Yeah, I'd say they all are kind of interrelated. People like to think about them differently, but if you're designing good automation, IoT is built into it. You're pushing data into your manufacturing systems and you're collecting that data. If you're using AI, if you're using machine vision, you're collecting images, and ideally you're improving your model over time and finding more defects. You're starting out hopefully doing well, but if you use that data and you advance your AI for your automated inspection and that, you keep getting better. So all these tools are very much interrelated and become more and more interrelated. We're seeing interesting changes in how you program robots and how robots learn to do better, and spending less human time setting up automation and robots being more adaptive.
Yeah, that was something I was going to say. We see in the development stages, like RLs training robots to achieve, very complex systems that would really be inefficient to program manually when you have like a 25 degree of freedom type of articulation that you're trying to do. It's inefficient to program that. You need to use and set up an AI model to actually train it to achieve the outcome that you're trying to get to. And you actually see when it's done, like it takes a number of days. The results come in days, not weeks and months.
Right.
But like Joshua, I agree on, there's also a tool chain there when you go from manufacturing to utilization of IoT for data collection. And then now you have these pools of data, right, that they're hard to actually look at. And again, good AI and good intelligence tools will help you find those cases where point you to where you should be looking. But I think, going back to one of those myths and misconceptions, it's going to point you in the right direction. You're going to have to look at that and do some actual analysis to really understand, is this noise or is this signal? And what do I do about it? That right now I haven't seen, as something that's going to be offloaded anytime soon.
Right. Excellent. No, this has been fascinating. I thank the both of you guys. It was a great session.